Even though 2 Middle East peace agreements will be signed at the White House tomorrow, we know that they are not the prophesied agreement that starts Daniel's 70th week. Why does the prophesied peace agreement have to be with the Palestinians? Well, we will answer this question on today's edition of End of the Age. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. You know, isn't it exciting to know we're living in the end time, watching the ongoing fulfillment of many prophecies, not just one. I mean, the agreements that will be signed at the White House tomorrow, those could very much aid in the signing of the eventual agreement that starts the final 7 years. But then there's the ongoing of world religion, world government, the establishment of the numbering system, the global numbering system that will be used for the mark of the beast, and many things going on, and the looming ominous prophecy of the sixth trumpet war or World War III, which that's not really exciting, but it's exciting to live in the end time. If you know your salvation is set, and you're just working in evangelism mode to trying to win people to God and expand the kingdom of God, it's a very exciting time. It's all in your perspective and how you look at it. But let's answer a very important question today about this Palestinian peace agreement that needs to be signed. Of course, tomorrow is the signing of the peace agreements at the White House. The Jewish News Syndicate reported that the Israeli Prime Minister arrives in Washington today, and they will be signing the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They're going to be signing the United Arab Emirates and the Bahrain peace agreements tomorrow at the White House. I think it's going to be the United Arab Emirates will be a peace agreement, and the Bahrain deal will be just an intent, because as of from Friday till now, they're not going to have time to draw up the agreement. But the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain will only be the third and fourth Arab states to normalize relations with the Jewish state after, of course, Egypt and Jordan. Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel in 79, and Jordan followed suit in 1994. And so with the, and also there's a lot of things happening. Serbia and Kosovo, they sign an agreement to normalize economic ties with Israel. And along with Malawi, all three of those nations are going to move their embassies to Jerusalem. So, I mean, the Middle East has been turned on its head over the last couple weeks now. And, you know, many other nations are expected to come on board pretty soon. If you think about it, Saudi Arabia is kind of sitting back. I mean, they're the big 800-pound elephant in the living room. But they have allowed Israel to open skies to allow them to fly across to the United Arab Emirates, to Bahrain, which is a huge deal, because you can kind of see that they're on board with this. I read some articles that said they pretty much had to allow Bahrain to come on board, but they're holding back to see how everything plays out, but they're expected to come on board pretty soon. So a lot of things are happening. But there's some people that are speculating that, hey, these are the deals. I've seen on Facebook, our social networking, people emailing me, this has to be the deal. Why does it have to be the Palestinians? Well, it's a very important question. The agreements that will be signed tomorrow at the White House, they could certainly play a very significant role in getting the prophesied peace agreement across the finish line. With coercion with the Palestinians and peer pressure and economic sanctioning, a lot of different things could happen before this is over with. However, the prophesied agreement will have to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So this is the question. Why? Why does the peace agreement that starts the final 7 years have to be between the Israelis and Palestinians? Why can't it be the United Arab Emirates deal that's going to be signed tomorrow? Why can't it be Bahrain? Why can't it be Saudi Arabia? And there's a lot of people speculating, and that's why I wanted to answer the question today, that this is not the one. I'm going to go into a lot of detail, so you guys definitely don't want to turn the channel. But let's just answer this question from a biblical and a historical perspective. And back on February 4th, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was speaking at a committee on exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. He made this statement. He said, "We know that resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains key to sustainable peace in the Middle East." From the United Nations all across the international community, they see the salient issue in the Middle East, as far as peace is concerned, is between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And like I said, we're going to get into a lot of detail on the other side of the break and see if we can answer this question once and for all. Why does the peace agreement that starts Daniel's 70th week have to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians? It's a great question.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, End Time Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
We're going to be answering the question, why does it have to be the Palestinians and the Israelis that start the final 7 years? But I got an announcement I want to make. The couple conferences that Irvin Baxter is going to be at this weekend, and these may be, it's either these or maybe one more conference will be I think that's the rest of them for this year. So you definitely would, if you're in the driving range, you definitely would want to attend one of these conferences this weekend. The first one is going to be Friday evening at the West Side Apostolic Pentecostal Church, 1540 West Ohio Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. That's September 18th at 7:30 p.m. And he's going to be teaching on 666, the Cashless Society. Then he's going to be traveling up to South Bend on Saturday and Sunday. He's going to be at the Ironwood UPC of South Bend, 4609 South Ironwood Drive. And that's going to be Saturday, September 19th at 7 p.m. he's going to be doing, again, the lesson 666, the Cashless Society. And then on Sunday morning at 10 a.m., that'd be September 20, he's going to be doing a Breaking Prophetic Fulfillments lesson with Q&A following. So if you'd like to join him this weekend up in Indianapolis and South Bend, you guys can travel up there. And if you need more information on that, go to endtime.com, and everything's right there on the homepage under the events section. So let's talk about this. I'm going to come at this from a biblical perspective first. The prophesied Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. The prophecy of the coming peace agreement is found Daniel 9:27. The Bible says, "And he, the Antichrist, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week," or a 7-year period. "In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice, the oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate." So without going into really this exhaustive theological discourse, because I got a lot of history I want to get into, let me briefly explain the prophecy. The he in Daniel 9:27, that's the Antichrist again. The covenant he will confirm is God's covenant with Abraham, described in Genesis 15:18. We've been calling it the Abrahamic covenant for years now, years and years and years. And President Trump comes out and says, hey, these deals we're signing now, that's the Abraham Accord. United Arab Emirates, now it's Bahrain, and whoever else comes on board, they're joining the Abraham Accord. And they're saying, hopefully, it's going to be the Palestinians. Well, we know at some point the Palestinians will sign a peace deal with the Israelis. It's only a matter of time because it's prophesied. But in Genesis 15:8, it says, "In the same day that the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land." What land? The promised land. "From the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." So the covenant is God's promise that the land of Israel will belong to the descendants of Abraham forever. Now, I've went into it. A lot of people said, well, hey, the descendants of Abraham, that could be Ishmael and the Arabs, right? No, because later on, God makes a covenant specifically with Isaac. Abraham said, well, what about Ishmael? And the Lord said, I've remembered Ishmael. I'm going to bless him. I'm going to make a great nation from him. But my promise for this land is going to be through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and that lineage. God was very specific about that. So the confirmation of the covenant will be when the Antichrist confirms that Israel has a right to live as a nation in the land God promised to Abraham. And we could get off into Ezekiel 37, where God would draw them back into the nation. It's prophesied, it happened, and the nation was reborn in 1948. And so that was God. Those people were drawn back there to that land. So anybody who's fighting against that, the Palestinians, the Arabs, whoever, they're fighting against a work of God, which is futile. And so that's what the dynamic that's going on. I mean, the passage says this confirming of the covenant will last for a week of years, or a 7-year period. It's just ahead of us now. What we're watching tomorrow, the signing of these two agreements, and one is an intent to sign, could very well be the beginning of this eventual agreement where the Palestinians will get on board with what Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates is doing. So the prophesied agreement will contain 5 elements. Number 1, and this is part of the way, the biblical way we know that the Palestinians have to be included in this. Not the United Arab Emirates, not Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. So I'm going to give you the biblical, and then we're going to get into the historic and what's going on with the political situation in the world. Number 1, the area of Judea, also known as the West Bank, will be given to the Palestinians as their homeland. So a Palestinian state in Judea, Matthew 24:15 through 16, and then verse 21. Jesus said, "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." Judea, the modern-day West Bank. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So Jesus foretold an event called the abomination of desolation, and which is when which is when the Antichrist stands in the rebuilt Jewish temple proclaiming to be God. Other passages clearly tell us that this event will happen 3.5 years after the Palestinian-Israeli agreement is signed. And he warns that Jews who are living in Judea, they're going to have to flee for their lives. So obviously Judea will be under enemy control by that time. We know from this prophecy that it will be the Palestinians. The Palestinians are the only ones on the planet vying for a two-state solution in the nation of Israel right now. It's not even though the United Arab Emirates are signing this agreement tomorrow, they're not vying for a two-state solution in Israel. So these are points that you need to understand when you're considering, does it have to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians? The Palestinians are the only ones that are vying for a two-state solution in the state of Israel. So when you're considering this, the deal of the century on page 12, it says this vision is a fair compromise and contemplates a Palestinian state that encompasses territory reasonably comparable in size to the territory of the West Bank and Gaza pre-1967. So, and if you look in the agreement, the map accompanying Trump's peace plan shows the vast majority of the new Palestinian state will be in Judea. So, it's important to know this because the Trump administration realizes this, the salient issue in this Middle East peace conflict is between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The international community realizes the same thing. That's what the original partition plan was from the United Nations back in 1947. Was between the Israelis and the Arabs that lived in Palestine, which are the Palestinians. So that's the first characteristic. Number two, the Jews living in the Palestinian homeland will be allowed to remain living as a Jewish minority in the Palestinian homeland. So Jews can stay in this new Palestinian state. Again, Matthew 24, 15, and 16. The passage clearly states there that there will be Jews living in the modern-day West Bank at the time of the abomination of desolation, which will occur 3.5 years after the Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. Then in President Trump's deal of the century, the Israeli population located in those enclaves that remain inside contiguous Palestinian territory, but that are part of the state of Israel, still have the option to remain in place unless they choose otherwise and maintain their existing Israeli citizenship. Well, this describes Israelis living inside the new Palestinian state, being able to stay there, still being citizens of Israel. Number three characteristic of the prophesied peace agreement, the Temple Mount's going to be placed under a sharing arrangement so that both Muslims and Jews will be allowed to worship there. So the Temple Mount's going to be shared. Revelation 11, 1 and 2. And there was given unto me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple, leave it out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months during the Great Tribulation. So this passage paints a picture of the temple and Jewish worshipers on the Temple Mount. This is all being talked about right now. Now this is being talked about even with the United Arab Emirates deal. But this is not going to put it under an internationally supervised sharing arrangement. Then the Bible says, then John was told not to measure the outer court of the temple because it would be under Gentile control during the last half of the final 7 years. Well, in President Trump's deal of the century, on page 16, Jerusalem's holy sites would remain open and available for peaceful worshipers and tourists from all faiths. People of every faith should be permitted to pray on the Temple Mount in a manner that is fully respectful of their religion, taking into account the times of each religion's prayers and holidays, as well as other religious factors. So there is one avenue that kind of could lead to the building of a third temple. And then number 4, the Jews will be allowed to build their temple on the Temple Mount without disturbing the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And again, the previous characteristic would allow for that, allowing everybody to come in their own traditions to worship there. And then 5, the issue of the control of Jerusalem will remain unresolved, and consequently its status will be put off until later, about 7 years later, obviously, according to the Bible. So it's very important that we understand that 3 of these characteristics of the end time prophesied agreement, they have to do with the Palestinians. A Palestinian state, Israel's living out there under Palestinian control, or in that an autonomous situation out there. And then the building of the third temple, that's going to have to be, they would have to have an agreement between the Palestinians before it's all over with, because we're talking about a 2-state solution, and part of way in the eastern side, on the other side of this, the big security wall, that the Palestinians would have a capital there. And even President Trump said that we would build a U.S. embassy in that capital. So they're going to have to be on board with this before this situation with the Temple Mount could be resolved. So 3 of them have to be with the Palestinians. Now, the Israel National News, they said, hey, they posted an article, wake up, a Palestinian state is on the way. Everybody realizes that the issue in the Middle East with peace has to be done with the Palestinians. They're even saying that even the United Arab Emirates deal, the Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, whoever comes on board, Oman, whoever comes on board with this, that it will eventually lead to a Palestinian deal with Israel. So they all recognize that that's the crux of the issue right there. Palestine and Israel. So this article says, hey, wake up everybody, a Palestinian state is on the way. Well, that's what the Bible says is going to happen. Jesus prophesied about it in Matthew 24. The sovereignty movement founders, they warn against an advance towards Palestinian state under the guise of normalization and rapprochement with Arab states. This is what they're talking about. They all recognize that, hey, once these other states move away from the Arab initiative, which said we have to go through the Palestinians first, once they move away from that, that the dominoes will start falling and it'll eventually lead to a Palestinian state. There are people who don't want that. The article actually said that we are more than ever concerned these days in the light of political process, the deceptive reports and announcements in the media, we hereby issue cautions and warnings against this. We see a number of the red blinking warning lights that the peace with the Emiratis and other Arab countries is not really peace in exchange for peace. It's presented by Prime Minister Netanyahu and his people, but is an integral part of the deal of the century, part of the process of formulating a Palestinian state. So it all goes back to, remember, what's the question I'm answering today? Why does it have to be between the Israelis and the Palestinian, the deal that starts the final 7 years? Everybody, the Arab world, the international community, and President Trump's administration realizes that to get true peace in the Middle East, there's got to be a deal signed between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Bible prophesies it, and this is what's the geopolitical situation on the ground there. The article says, now is the time to turn our attention to the bright blinking red warning signals showing us the tragic direction to the current political steps and what they are leading to, this Palestinian state. In the preface to the deal of the century, the following quote appears, and I'm quoting, "We believe that if more Muslim and Arab countries normalize relations with Israel," this is in President Trump's peace deal, "it will help advance a just and fair resolution to the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians. So if you hear them talk, they say, well, hey, we want to get all these Arab nations on board, and they do, but they also realize that if they can get all them Arab nations on board, then the Palestinians almost will be forced to get on board with it as well. And it seems that the agreement with the Emiratis and the other Gulf states is leading them to directly into that dangerous direction, the article says. The pressure on Abbas to return to the negotiating table and accept the deal of the century is increasing from outside as well as inside the Palestinian, the PLO and the Palestinians. From Egypt, the Emiratis, the United States, even within the Palestinian leadership. And I'm going to mention a few indications of these pressures. Number one, the Arab League just refused to hold the urgent conference at the request of the Palestinian Authority. And they actually did hold a conference just recently, and they rejected the PA's request. This was Bahrain. They rejected the PA's request to approve a clause to condemn normalization. And Saudi Arabia allowed an Israeli flight over its skies, but announced that it would not normalize relations with Israel until a Palestinian state is established. But they may do that. There's a lot of things that are happening. You understand that Saudi Arabia, that's a huge step for them to allow a flight over from Israel, a direct flight straight over their territory to the United Arab Emirates. That's huge. So it shows that they're really contemplating coming on board with what's going on with normalization between the Saudi Arabia and Israel. And so you can see a lot of things are coming down right now that let us know. And I'm going to get into some history. I'll get into a lot of stuff on the other side of the break. But the peace agreement that starts the final 7 years, beyond Matthew chapter 24, what Jesus prophesied, because of the abomination of desolation, a lot of different things, the West Bank, we know that it has to be between Israel and the Palestinians.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel and her people. We would like to thank Endtime for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We marvel at your team keeping the time schedule, keeping everyone comfortable, the wonderful driver, the brilliant guide, the entire tour program, good hotel choices, and stellar food. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter, listen to his current teachings, and had some interesting questions answered so eloquently. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia.
Experience the Holy Land in the most amazing way. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter for our upcoming Israel tour. For more information, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So the sources in the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah are saying that in a closed discussion that the policy of a sit and do nothing is costing the Palestinians a very heavy price. They're kind of getting fed up with what the Palestinians are doing. Sources in the Palestinian Authority estimate that the threat of annexation has been postponed for 2 to 5 years, and I've read several articles that say that, at least to 2024, and that Mahmoud Abbas must take advantage of this to return to the negotiating process. The Times of Israel reported that sources with direct knowledge of the matter They claim that the Trump administration gave the United Arab Emirates a commitment during normalization negotiations that Washington would not renegotiate Israel annexation of parts of the West Bank until 2024 at the earliest. That's what they told the Times of Israel. And so you can see here that President Trump is kind of saying, hey, I really believe I'm going to be reelected in 2020, and then we'll put this thing off, we'll get everything going, and everything hopefully will be solidified by the end of 2024. We'll have to see what happens. But continuing on, a Palestinian security source said that lately there have been contacts between the American and Palestinian security forces to investigate the PA's readiness to return to negotiations in the light of the postponement of the annexation plan. So you hear in the news that, oh, the Palestinians don't want to have anything to do with it. We're condemning this United Arab Emirates and Bahrain deal. But then if you get real deep down in the details and just keep reading and researching, you can see that there are people that are willing to negotiate and possibly come to a negotiating table because of the annexation plan has been pushed off. So the Palestinians have made it clear to the Americans that meanwhile, there is covert security cooperation between them and Israel, and all of this information is from the Middle East expert Barak Yadid. He's the head of the Arab desk at the TPS news agency. And then finally, and apparently the most concerning, we must remember that the main player in the deal with the Emiratis is former senior figure in the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Dalan. Now, he's the close confidant of the Emiratis leader, Prince Mahmoud Zayed. Dalan is looking forward to the day when he will return to the leading the PA and will succeed Mahmoud Abbas. Now, if he was in, they'd already be at the negotiating table, but he's not the head yet. He's interested in doing this as the head of the Palestinian state. And this is where he is directing the Emiratis' leadership. And another worrying item, the article says, is that the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, is still committed and bound to the paradigm of two states. He never denied or expressed regret for his Bar Ilan speech, where he advocated a two-state solution. We're talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu here. Even if he claims that it would be a demilitarized state, everyone knows that ultimately a demilitarized state is a state like all other states. They would eventually get weapons. And we know that that's where the Great Tribulation is going to emanate from, or at least part of it. Jesus prophesied about it in Matthew 24. So when the two-state solution is created, yes, they'll get guns in there, they'll get weapons of war, and it's not going to look too good for some of the Israelis that stay out there. Of course, we're going to be going out there trying to warn them to get them to leave. Many of them will leave. The Bible says Judah will be fighting in Jerusalem at the time of the Battle of Armageddon. They're not going to be out there in the West Bank. They're not going to be hiding down there in Petra. They're not that would be a suicide mission for them. And so we'll just have to see how everything plays out. Continuing on, does Israel again gain anything from this political process? Is there really a win-win situation? Will Israel really have peace in exchange for peace? It's what a lot of people are asking these questions. After all, the purpose of the deal of the century is the solution to, here it is, not the United Arab Emirates problem or the Bahrain problem. The purpose of the deal of the century is the solution to the Palestinian and the Israeli problem. And actually, Israel doesn't have a problem. It's the Palestinian problem. And it means the establishment of a state for them. You know, in a speech that he gave on the 28th of January, 2020 at the White House, President Trump made it clear that forging peace between the Israelis and Palestinians may be the most difficult challenge of all. All prior administrations from President Lyndon Johnson have tried and bitterly failed. And it seems that the peace process now being formulated for economic and commercial development has one result: the surrender of large parts of land of Israel and the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is exactly what the Bible prophesies is going to happen. Again, what's the question we're answering here? the prophesied peace agreement that starts the final 7 years has to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians. They are the only ones that are vying for a two-state solution in Israel. Pinhas Inbari, he's a veteran journalist and commentator of Arab affairs. He's a senior consultant and researcher for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He writes a book on the Palestinians. And he writes clearly on the topic in his essay from September 9, 2020, in Zaman Yisrael. He states, after we have sobered up from the fake annexation, the time has come to sober up from the fake peace for peace. There is a problem with the Americans. Now, he's saying this, not me. And they mean what they say. To understand the Trump plan, you just have to listen to the program manager, Jared Kushner. They intend that a Palestinian state will arise in parts of the West Bank. And that's true. You look at President Trump's peace plan, that's what's in there. The Palestinian state will bring Arab states into an agreement with Israel, that the original Saudi plan, but in reserve order. Not a state first and normalization later, but first normalization, which we can see playing out right now. Those two agreements tomorrow, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, that's the normalization, and then the Palestinian state. I mean, this guy's called it. So they're saying we're raising the alarm about the existential danger concealed in the political processes that are leading to the establishment of a Palestinian state in the heart of Israel. Why? Because the conflict, when all is said and done, is between Israel and the Palestinians. So let's talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is it all about? Where did it start? What's the origin? Well, since the time of King David, close to 3,000 years ago, Jerusalem continued to be Israel's capital until the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 A.D. And after an almost 2,000-year exile, God began to draw the Jewish nation back to the Promised Land. It's a fulfilled prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 37, Ezekiel's boneyard. And he prophesied to the bones, they all came back together. The Bible says in Ezekiel 37, this is the nation of Israel. So what happened? Let me give you a little timeline here to show you about this peace agreement that's coming and why it's just between the Israelis and the Palestinians. A lot of people don't know the history. So they would think, well, it could be between Israel and any one of the other. No. It's got to be between Israel and the Palestinians. Why are the Palestinians vying for that land? Okay, here's some history. Theodor Herzl is the father of the modern Jewish state. There was a yearning to return to Israel and began to intensify in the Jewish hearts during the latter part of the 19th century. Theodor Herzl was a Hungarian Jew who grew up attempting to fit into European culture. Herzl grew to believe that anti-Semitism could not be defeated or cured, only avoided. And the only way to avoid it was to establish a Jewish state. In June of 1895, he wrote in his diary, "In Paris, I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism." And around that time, Herzl started writing pamphlets about a Jewish state. And Herzl claimed that these pamphlets resulted in the establishment of the Zionist movement. And they did play a large role in the movement's rise and success. Herzl spent the rest of his life visiting presidents, prime ministers, urging the establishment of a Jewish state. And Herzl predicted within 50 years of his death, a Jewish state would be born. Well, he died in 1904, and the state of Israel was born in 1948. So today, he is revered as the father of the state of Israel. So then we move to World War I. The Ottoman Empire captured Jerusalem in 1516 A.D. The Ottoman control of the Middle East continued until World War I. With the defeat of Turkey's Ottoman Empire in 1917, control of the Middle East shifted to Great Britain and France. Then you have the Balfour Declaration. You remember Mahmoud Abbas a few years ago, I think it was in 2017, he tried to sue Great Britain over the Balfour Declaration. Just crazy, but this is how much they're involved in this. I mean, it's like, once you understand this history, you can see why one of the reasons we say it's got to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Beyond the Bible, when you tie history into it, there's nobody else. So the Balfour Declaration, that was when the Holy Land came under the control of the British, and eventual Jews petitioned the British government to facilitate the establishment of a homeland for the Jews. On November 2, 1917, British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour wrote to the Lord Walter Rothschild, and he made this quote. He said, "His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective." This historic statement from the British government became known as the Balfour Declaration. Very important in the history of Israel. Then you have the British Mandate. At the 1920 San Remo Conference, the victor nations of World War I assigned the mandate for Palestine. Now, in Palestine, there were Arabs, Jews, all kinds of people living there. Not just, there weren't Palestinians, they were Arabs, all kinds of people. There were Jews living there as well. But this was the mandate for Palestine, and they gave it to the United Kingdom under Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. The Allies also decided to make the UK responsible for putting into effect its own Balfour Declaration of 1917. So this action of the League of Nations enshrined the Balfour Declaration into international law. Keep that in mind. So, of course, then we have Hitler's horrific Holocaust. In 1939, the world's worst war broke out at that point. Over the next 6 years, 52 million human beings met violent deaths. Among these were 6 million Jews that Adolf Hitler shipped off to concentration camps. And just when Jewish people thought that their lives could get no worse, it did. Hitler's gas chambers and crematoriums cruelly snuffed out young and old alike. Hitler's goal was to rid the earth of the Jews once and for all. And he called his extermination campaign the final solution. Totally a horrific situation in history even. And so, what are we doing? We're answering the question, why does it have to be Israel and the Palestinians, an agreement that starts the final 7 years?
Most of us walk around day by day blind to the prophecies being fulfilled right before us. Every news report brings a new piece to the puzzle in the race towards the final 7 years and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, more than ever, it is important for God's people to understand the times in which we are living. On November the 12th, 2013, we opened our Jerusalem Prophecy College in downtown Jerusalem. These same courses are now available online for people who are unable to attend the classes in person. We welcome students to join us and discover the link between current events and the prophecies of the Bible. Take your place in the prophecy of Daniel 11:33. Enroll in the Jerusalem Prophecy College today. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
When the magnitude of Hitler's horrible Holocaust was revealed to the world, the collective guilt of the world's nations, moving on, compelled them to finally grant the Jewish people a place to call home. On November 29th, 1947, and here's where we're going to run into an issue. When the world international community recognizes Israel, that's when the Arabs, they just were ready to rise at that point. On November 29th, 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the area of the British Mandate into an Arab state and an Israeli state. The Jews were thrilled to have a homeland for after almost 2,000 years of being sifted through the nations, accepted the partition plan with great joy. Well, the Arabs immediately rejected the plan because they saw them as invaders. But again, you can't rule out the God factor. God was drawing them back. This was happening by a God movement. And so the Arabs were fighting against them. Imagine a 6 days war and what all happened there. But the Arabs immediately rejected the UN partition plan, and they didn't want a state. They simply wanted to eradicate the Jews. So because they didn't own that area, that was not the Palestinians' homeland. That was not a state. According to Town Hall, let's talk about the Palestinians. I want to get into that for a second. The Palestinian Arabs that fought the Jews, they've been fighting them since the 1800s. And this is very key. Palestinians are not a distinct ethnic group, but they are instead a collection of really impoverished Arabs who lived in the Palestinian region under the Ottoman Empire. They just lived there. Most were not landowners. Some were, but most were not. They were instead laborers who rented land from wealthy Turks that owned the land in the Palestinian region. The Palestinian identity was born when the Jewish state of Israel was internationally recognized. So when the United Nations said, hey, we're going to offer a partition plan, we're going to give Israel this little sliver. I mean, it was nothing. And the Palestinians the Arabs were going to get the rest that lived there. They said, no, absolutely not. They rejected it. Israel accepted it. And you understand Israel's very, very small. 45, 50 miles wide, about 250 miles high. And the Arabs want the majority of that. They really don't want Jews to be there at all. But even this very small sliver of a partition plan, they said no. They rejected it. Israel is so small, you could put, I think, 33 Israels in the state of Texas. That's how small that nation is. So the majority of those identifying as Palestinians today are, in fact, Jordanian. And from the beginning of the Zionist migration, Palestinian Arabs hated the Jews. And this stemmed from centuries of living under an Islamic empire which categorized Jews as a diminutive class of people to the Muslim ruling class. Palestinians aligned with the Nazis during World War II and planned to exterminate their Jewish neighbors. Did you know that about the Palestinians? Palestinian Arabs have fought Jews on land and religion since the 1800s, and their descendants continue to do so today. Now, knowing this history, you can look and say, okay, the geopolitical situation going on in the Middle East and what's got to happen to finally have peace, they will have to have an agreement between Israeli and the Palestinians. What's going to happen tomorrow could lead to that, but that will not be the agreement that starts the final 7 years. You understand why I'm saying this? What's going on? A lot of people are questioning right now. They're signing peace agreements. This could be the one. Can't be the one. Because look at the history that I just gave you. It's the Arabs that were living there. They're Palestinians today, and they're the ones that are vying for the land. The United Arab Emirates signing a deal tomorrow. They're not vying for the land of Israel. They're normalizing relations. They're going to have trade deals. They're going to have travel, tourist, technology. They're going to share that. That's what this normalization means. And some defensive options for Israel to help out maybe against Iran with the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain. But they're not vying for the land of Israel. The Palestinians are. I just went through a lot of the history. I mean, the Jewish Virtual Library. If you think about it, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, the original Palestine National Charter, back in 1964, I want to go through just a few of their articles to let you know what that PLO is all about. Article 1 of that, Palestine is an Arab homeland. But didn't David purchase the threshing floor of Arana, which is now the Temple Mount, way back 3,000 years ago, and make that the capital of Israel forever? God said, I will put my name there. That's where his son Solomon built the second temple, or the first temple, I'm sorry. But yet, the article number 1 of the PLO, their original 1964 charter, Palestine is an Arab homeland, bound by strong national ties to the rest of the Arab countries, and which together form the large Arab homeland. They do not want the Jews there. They're all about kicking the Jews out, driving them off into the ocean. Article 6 of that original charter was the Palestinians are those Arab citizens. Now, this is in their own charter. The Palestinians are those Arab citizens who were living normally in Palestine up to 1947, where they remained or were expelled. Many of them are still there. Every child who was born to a Palestinian parent after this date, whether in Palestine or outside, is a Palestinian. Article 17, the partitioning of Palestine in 1947 by the United Nations and the establishment of Israel are illegal in the eyes of the PLO and false, regardless of the loss of time, because they were contrary to the wish of the Palestine people and its natural right to its homeland. But it was not their original homeland. They were living there. That was it. It was not a state. It never has been a state. And their charter goes on to say, and in violation of the basic principles of embodied in the Charter of the United Nations, foremost among is the right to self-determination. Article 18, remember the Balfour Declaration I talked about. They say the Balfour Declaration, the mandate system, and all that has been based upon them are considered fraud. The claim of historic and spiritual ties between Jews and Palestine, are not in agreement with the facts of history or with the true basis of sound statehood. Well, somebody doesn't know their history, because in history, that was Israel's homeland. And in the Bible, which supersedes anything, is their homeland given to them by God. And so they're fighting a lost cause here. They go on to say Judaism, because it is a divine religion, is not a nationality with independent existence. And furthermore, the Jews are not one people with an independent personality, because they are citizens of the countries to which they belong. But you got to understand the Bible. God drew them back. History shows that Israel is the homeland of the Jews, not the Arabs. God promised that land to Abraham, remember, all the way back in Genesis 15:18, through his descendants forever. And he actually told them, he said, when you go into that land, you drive out the inhabitants of the land. I want only Jews to live here. So now you can see that this final peace agreement, it's going to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians, even though there may be many Arab nations that come on board with this quote-unquote Abraham Accord. The peace agreement that starts the final 7 years has to be between Israeli and the Palestinians. Article 19 of the original PLO charter said that Zionism is a colonialist movement in its inception, aggressive and expansionist in its goals, racist and segregationist and in its configurations, and fascist in its means and aims. Israel, in its capacity as the spearhead of this destructive movement and the pillar for colonialism, is a permanent source of tension and turmoil in the Middle East in particular, and to the international community in general. Because of this, the people of Palestine are worthy of the support and sustenance of the community of nations. So, not too fond of the Jews, are they? Article 20 of the PLO Charter, the original, 1964. The causes of peace and security and the needs of right and justice demand from all nations, in order to safeguard true relations among people and to maintain the loyalty of the citizens to their homeland, to consider Zionism an illegal movement, and to outlaw its presence and activities. The organization, the PLO organization, is in charge with the movement of the Palestinian people in its struggle to liberate its homeland, drive the Jews out, in all liberational, organizational, political, and financial matters, and in all other needs of the Palestinian question in the Arab and international spheres. Now, that's what's going through the mind of Mahmoud Abbas and the leadership of the Palestinians today. Now, I only give you, probably 6 or 8 of the original charter. There's many of them. So you can see that understanding history helps you to understand the situation on the ground right now. Mahmoud Abbas sees Israel as, in his mind, illegally occupying 1 square inch of Israel today. He considers it Palestine, but it's actually Israel today. And so now, if you look at this from the biblical and historical perspective, again, what's happening tomorrow? United Arab Emirates deal, the Bahrain that's coming on, and the people of Serbia and Malawi and some of these other nations, Kosovo, that are going to move their embassies to Jerusalem. A lot of different things are happening, and you might think, well, this is it. A lot of wheels are in motion. A lot of things are taking place. This could be the one. I've actually heard people saying that. That's really why I wanted to do this program. If you look at the biblical prophecies and if you look at the historical, they could sign deals with all the other Arab nations today, and that's still not going to be the peace agreement that starts the final 7 years. They will have to get something done between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because look at the original PLO charter. They're the ones that are fighting for a 2-state solution. They would love to drive Israel off into the sea, liberate. It's the Palestinian Liberation Organization. What do they want to liberate? They want to liberate Israel of the Jews. They call it Palestine still. And you understand the Jerusalem Post was originally the Palestine Post. But they were just Arabs that lived there prior to 1948. So now you can see that I wanted to go into some history. I wanted to go into the Bible and show you it's got the one that starts Daniel's 70th week, the final 7 years before the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. We will be watching for an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. God bless each and every one.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.